Hello again. I must first apologise for removing a video on this subject, which I published here yesterday. There was howling, baying, and yapping from a small group of certain ill-disposed persons who thought that this might be a chance to get my channel cancelled. However, it's written that the dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. So it is in this case. I realised that some of the phrases I used in that video might be open to misinterpretation, and so I thought it best to remove it. I think the hope was that with a bit of luck I'd end up being arrested like Lucy Connolly for inciting violence, which is absurd. This new one has been checked by a lawyer and is guaranteed not to step beyond the bounds of what a reasonable person might view as an historical survey of a certain phenomenon which is seen in this country. This is the fact that more than half of our prime ministers take office without anybody voting for them, and that removing prime ministers from office by undemocratic means is as English as crumpets for tea and cricket on the village green. The popularity of this extra parliamentary action is relevant to the situation we face today in this country, with a Prime Minister who is widely hated but was voted in a year ago with a substantial majority. Let's look briefly at the way in which we have seen Prime Ministers appointed in the last 50 years or so. Since 1976, we have had 11 Prime Ministers in this country. Of these 11, 7 first became Prime Minister without anybody at all voting for them. Some of them later did win elections, but that wasn't how they first got into number 10 Downing Street. Jim Callaghan, John Major, Gordon Brown, Theresa May, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak all managed to become Prime Minister without being elected. 4 of them never won a general election. This is how our political system in Britain works, you see. We make an absolute fetish of democracy and talk about the will of the people and so on. But the reality is that prime ministers in Britain are always being deposed and new ones installed without a single vote being cast. It is this tradition which gives us hope that our present leader, Keir Starmer, will be removed from office without our needing to wait until there's a general election. Some of this process is managed by devious and cunning politicians who are stabbing each other in the back and conspiring to get the Prime Minister out of Downing Street so that they can themselves get in. However, the people can also have a hand in removing the Premier by direct action. I do not say that this is a desirable or praiseworthy course of action, merely that it happens. In the late 1980s, one might have thought that Margaret Thatcher was absolutely unassailable. She had won a third general election in 1987, emerging with a majority of over 100. You would have thought that at the end of 1989, she was impossible to shift. The following year, she had been removed from office as a result of popular feeling and direct political action on the streets. The trigger was, of course, an enormously unpopular policy, which was the abolition of the domestic rates and their replacement with a community charge, which soon became universally known as the poll tax. From the beginning, many people refused to pay this tax. This was not good because there were so many people refusing to obey the law that it would have been impossible to take legal action against them all. This was one form of direct action by ordinary people refusing to pay an unpopular tax. In March 1990, another form of direct action was used, which was rioting. There were riots that month in Bristol, then in Hackney, where there was widespread looting. 50 or 60 shops had their windows smashed in and the contents of the shop looted. Then, shockingly, there was rioting in the heart of the West End. The thumbnail to this video shows a scene from that riot. The sight of central London being turned into a war zone was enough to start the clock ticking on Thatcher's premiership. She hung on for a few more months, but was then forced out of office. This then is a fairly typical instance of how we manage things in this country. We kid ourselves that we always observe the correct democratic processes, but it's not so. Well over half our prime ministers enter office without even the pretense of democracy, and this is how it has always been. If a prime minister embarks on policies which enough people reject and demonstrate their discontent openly, then it's perfectly possible to get rid of that prime minister and see one take over the job who will change direction, just as John Major did with the poll tax when he took over from Margaret Thatcher. Her fall from office could easily happen again if a Prime Minister today pursued a policy which enough people rebelled against and showed their disapproval of. And that's all I will say on this subject, that it's something of a British tradition to remove Prime Ministers by extra parliamentary means. As I say, I'm not endorsing it, I'm not saying it's good, I'm saying that it happens. And I don't think that many people quite realise how many of our prime ministers have been chucked out of office or installed without the electorate having the slightest say in the matter.